because they were innocent. I'm not so sure the firstborn baby of the Egyptians are necessarily the one that fall for what was happening either. Do you? Right?
But were they holy though?
No.
So what do you call holy?
Well, because they were, the point is, they were, and number one, it fulfills the prophecy of Isaiah, who looks back to the time, but then looks forward, because then that's quoted in the New Testament. Okay? I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but the point is, there is a relationship between the sacrifice, the shedding of blood, and ultimately what? Atonement. And the only,
Salvation.
finally it comes in the person of Jesus Christ. All right? But you try to make sense of this. Yeah, those innocent babies were killed because of the prophecy of God. The wrath came upon them. You know how we sit back and talk about what's fair in this world? What's fair about that? Nothing, unless there's some kind of eternal perspective that we put on it. But what we do have is this kind of recurring thing that happens, and ultimately, when you finally go to the cross, what do you have? Do you have bloodshed? Do you have a sacrifice? Do you have the enemies of God trying to kill God? Is there a war going on in the person of Jesus? The whole thing, it all comes to a final point in where Jesus Christ, the true one, the one who actually brings atonement, but all of these are speaking of the atonement that's coming. Right? What about the martyr? What about the martyr that's happening? Martyrdom right now is happening at a higher level than any other time in all of history, including the first century. Who was it? John Lennox. I was watching John Lennox, and he said, and he gave an hour presentation, and he said, when I'm done with this hour based on statistics, there would be, like, he said, 6 or 8 people will be martyred for their faith around the world. What about them? What's their shedding? What's the blood shedding for their? Why are they're shed? Is their blood being shed in us? Does their blood atone for us? The answer is no. But how would you like to have the honor of being a martyr? In other words, somebody who's still standing for Christ, and he's being martyred, his life is being taken away, his blood is being shed. Like the holy innocents. Neither one of them have a choice, do they? Well, I guess the one has a choice. He can renounce his faith, but he won't. So you have bloodshed on both sides. You have bloodshed in righteousness, which is connected to mercy, and you have bloodshed connected to what? The wrath of God. Both sides you have bloodshed. Both of them produce righteousness. One is a result of people's evil. What about the blood of Jesus Christ? Is the blood of God being shed because of our evil and our wrath upon him and our anger and hatred towards him? Or is it because of the mercy that he bestows upon us? Mercy. It's both. It's ultimately mercy, because that's who God is. Remember what we say about God's righteousness. It comes in his wrath and his mercy. It happens to Jesus Christ. So the answer is yes, both. Ultimately, all of the sacrifice. You know, you could suggest that Jesus was the most evil person in the world, and you would be right, because he who knew no sin, what? Became sin for us, so that when the judgment of God comes upon the Christ, what's the difference between the judgment of God that comes upon the Christ versus the judgment of God that comes upon the Edomites, or the Egyptians, or the Assyrians, or the Americans, or the holy innocents? What's the difference?
Jesus was the last sacrifice.
He is the sacrifice. He's the point of it all. Huh?
But not,
He would,
the sacrifice, but he's not the last sacrifice, because sacrifices
are still happening now.
made.
Yes.
But But that attaches to the evil of the world. And it's only the mercy of God that can turn that into anything
That's right.
good,
Mhm.
like our atonement. That's miraculous, that God can turn evil
Into
into
his
atonement
will,
for the
right.
world.
right.
But he's not sitting back there trying to think of ever more horrible things.
No,
People that he's
no.
mad at.
No, anything horrible, anything that happens to people is a result of our sin. You can't change those things. But what you can do is recognize that ultimately, the death of Christ, it becomes the what? It's the wrath of God and the mercy of God, both in the person of Jesus Christ. So then it finally makes sense. I would suggest that's when it makes sense. That's when my death makes sense. That's when all of the unfairness of the world makes sense finally, when it culminates in the person of Jesus Christ. And the point being, all of this points to that, though, right? Yeah. God isn't up there wanting to do anything bad. He never has. God is good. Remember, that's why I said at the beginning, what righteousness comes by his wrath. Punishment brings about righteousness. But God isn't, he's not wanting any of that. That's not his character. What is his character? Love, mercy. And this is the fantastic thing about it. If you want to apply it to your life, think of the tragedy. Think of the mom who loses the child just in the birth canal. You know, what's her answer? This is the answer. This ultimately becomes the answer for all of us. Does God want that child to die in the womb? No. Does God want any of these bad things to happen? The answer is no, but they do because of our sin. Okay? And then the punishment is also, though, part of the right. You can't separate the punishment from the righteousness of God. And that's what a lot of people do. And that's when they can't come up with the conclusion, why does God allow bad things to happen? As if he is the one who's the author of these things, and he's not. Just like in our own society, that's why I brought up the point that in our society today, if you have a judge, he's going to have to what? Or she's going to have to pronounce judgment on somebody, not because she wants to, but because we have to have some sense of civilization. Right? But this is eschatological. It's the ultimate thing. This is what answers the question. So what's I think so wonderful here is that he does. Isaiah links the wrath of God to the sacrifice, because the wrath of God is attached to the sacrifice. Something's getting killed and it's spilling its blood. That's not what God wants. Right? The bad guy's getting killed. Well, in a sense, we're all bad guys because we're all sin and we're all going to die. Right? But I would suggest the blood of the martyr is a whole lot higher of an honor. He's being killed by an evil man. He's still being killed. But it ultimately rests in Jesus. Does it make any sense? How many of you are more confused than not? Give me another answer for this.
Well, it kind of makes me think of you always say a double-edged sword.
It is. That's a good way to put it. Thank you.
Sword, one hand, kills an innocent lamb for sacrifice, on the other hand, it wipes out a nation because they're totally evil.
Mm-hmm.
So either way, it's righteous, but it's just how the sword's used.
They're both righteous. What is the most righteous thing that has ever happened? It's the Son of God who is sinless. That's why, by the way, the lamb has to be an unblemished lamb, right? No defect. Ultimately, the person of Jesus Christ, right? Should we lighten it up a little bit? That's what this is saying. Help me out if you think differently. The sword of the Lord is bathed in blood. Okay, here's the skeptic. You want to follow that kind of God? He's enjoying the blood. Well, it doesn't say that, does it? Does it say he's enjoying it? Well, right away, you take that, the sword of the Lord is bathed in blood, it's covered in fat. Wow, look at that. God is slaughtering, just like terrorists are slaughtering. God is a terrorist here. No, he's judging Edom for their terror, because it's righteous to do. It is covered with fat, the blood of lambs and goats, fat from the kidney of rams. For the Lord has a sacrifice in Bozrah, and a great slaughter in Edom. Let's go on. And the wild ox will fall with them, and the bull calves and the great bulls. Their land will be drenched with blood, and the dust will be soaked with fat. I'm going to start moving along here. For the Lord has a day of vengeance, okay? This is the great and terrible day of the Lord. A year of retribution to uphold Zion's cause, okay? You see that? What is Zion eschatologically here?
Jerusalem.
Huh?
Isn't it Jerusalem?
Yeah, Israel or us, the church. All right? It's his salvation. Edom's streams will be turned into pitch, her dust into burning sulfur, her land will become blazing pitch. It will not be quenched for night and day, its smoke will rise forever. That sounds very much like the book of Revelation to me. From generation to generation it will lie desolate. No one will ever pass through it again. We're talking eschatologically. The desert owl and, here we go. Now he's going to start speaking, all of these animals are what Leviticus, the law says, is the unclean birds and animals. They're unclean ones. Remember? There were the clean ones that you could eat, and then there were the unclean animals that you couldn't eat. Okay? So the desert owl is an unclean one. The screech owl will possess it. The great owl and the raven will nest there. God will stretch out over Edom. Remember what Edom is? It's the nations. The measuring line of chaos and the plumb line of desolation. This is just, I'm spending too much time on this chapter. We need to get to chapter 35 so you can get a nice breath of fresh air. But this gets really interesting. This is what I was talking to Chris about earlier today. Her nobles will have nothing there to be called a kingdom. It's done. This is judgment. All her princes will vanish away. Now, thorns will overrun her citadels or fortresses. Nettles, which is a stinging plant, and brambles will stronghold. In other words, what you have there is like thorny plants will be the stronghold. She will become a haunt for jackals, a home for owls. Desert creatures will meet with hyenas. And is this what you guys have in your translations? I'm reading the NIV. What, do you guys all have that? Does anybody have anything different? Desert creatures will meet with hyenas, and wild goats will bleat to each other. There the night creatures will also repose and find for themselves places of rest. Anybody have anything different than that? Anybody else have a different translation? We're not all reading from NIV, are we?
We've got the good news.
Is it the same way? All right, here we go. When you read some of these words in the Hebrew, go much deeper than this. For instance, and this is what how Luther determines the wild goats. Field demons and night creatures, night demons. Now Luther isn't the only one. Many people, in fact, you read all over the place. I researched this. A lot of the root words for these have to do with devils and demons, and just different interpretations. When you go into the Hebrew, it's sometimes very hard. You know, a word will have a meaning, it'll have a root meaning, but it'll also be used in different ways. So it's sometimes very hard to completely interpret the Hebrew. But this is kind of thing, and then the night creatures, the nocturnal, the word is nocturnal or night, will come up. So what you start getting out of this is something a whole lot more spooky when you start getting into the,
It's sinister.
very sinister, very sinister. And what is really interesting here, let me see what, I wrote some things here.
So is it she, I know in Revelation, she is like, rides the beast, there's a female that rides the beast in, and I don't know, something. So is that why she is referring, is that bringing those two together?
That's interesting, because in Revelation, she rides on Babylon the beast, right?
Right.
That's interesting, because there are also those who interpret this, I don't want to go this far with it, but have you ever heard of Lilith? Lilith? Some would interpret that as Lilith, who supposedly, and now this is not in the scriptures, but there are those who suggest that Lilith was the first wife of Adam before Eve. And a lot of feminist movements move in that direction. Have you ever, there's the Lilith Fair, a lot of female vocalists, some of which I really like a lot. They did a concert or a tour even, I think. That's this whole Lilith thing. Let's not go there, but there was. But what is really interesting here again, you know, when I read this and I just keep it with the goats and the jackals and things like that, what do I think of? I'm thinking a desert, and I'm thinking it's dark, it's nocturnal, and what happens at nighttime, you know, when the predators come out, the snakes come out, and all these, and they go out and they're what? They're going to be feeding, and it's a very haunting kind of a thing. Well, then you start going into these demons and things like that. And I did some research. Here's my Isaiah thing here. Alexander was talking about it. I should.
So who is the reference to her?
In verse 13.
And where?
She will become a haunt of jackals, a home for owls. Let's not even go to Lilith, okay? Because I didn't even research. That was a.
I'm just asking,
Yeah.
who is her? Who is the reference to her several times?
Edom.
I think it's the land.
Yeah, Edom.
It's the land.
Why is Edom a female?
Okay.
Right.
Why is she a female?
Because females are really bad.
Yeah, they're bad.
Everybody knows that.
I got it.
Also she is referred to as the church too. Remember that. Because the church began with who? We didn't have a church until somebody came to be Eve. So they take the good and the bad.
Well, the church is also the bride.
That's right. The church is very feminine. When the church is the bride and everything else. But let's, all right, where do we go with this? I'm so prepared before and I feel a little Oh, here's my heading, and you know, I have to tell you, Carla, I was right all along. I write, let's talk vampires. Because I used to always, Carla used to hate my analogy with when I would talk about, what was it with vampires? Our sinful flesh is like vampires, and I would say, when you think about the folklore of the vampire, what does the vampire do? Yes, it comes out at night, it's the walking dead, it's already dead, but it can't die. And it feeds on people, and it's very evil. Well, that's your sinful flesh. And I can remember I changed it to zombies, to make you feel better. And I guess you can use zombies too. But I still like the vampire better, and here, guess what? There are those who would suggest...
The kids.
Huh? There were those- Oh, they can take it better than we think.
Probably right after Twilight came out.
Okay, maybe I'll read a little bit of this, it's a little bit dry, but, you know, shaggy monsters, like the goat is a shaggy monster, but according to Luther, it's a field devil, somebody else, it was a wood devil. But this could very well be where our folklore comes with vampires and these kinds of things. I always wondered myself, and this is one of the things I was thinking about today, when you watch a vampire movie, and the vampire in my lifetime has evolved. And I go back to are we okay listening to this? I'm getting some funny looks. Remember that old one, I think in 1925, that one vampire movie?
Nosferatu?
Yeah, right? And it's a black and white, you ever watch that one? He was pretty sinister, but now there's like a romanticism with vampires these days with what's coming out with, the Twilight stuff and all that stuff. But the bottom line is, I always wondered when you watch the vampire movie, it always had to do with crucifixes and holy water, and things that to me always was a very good description about what evil is. I mean, it's the Walking Dead, and I've always, when I come to realize the sinful flesh, I've always thought that the vampire was a really, it's dead, but it can't die unless it's staked in the heart, and I'm thinking, yeah, my sinful flesh, I'm going to have to deal with my sinful flesh, even though I'm a redeemed child of God. That vampire exists in me because it's evil, and I can't redeem it, and you can't redeem a vampire. It's forever, right? So until the stake in my heart happens, until I finally die, that's when I'm going to finally be rid of my selfish human flesh. See? And I always thought that the imagery of the vampire was really good. I mean, as far as, now it's folklore, there's no such thing as vampires, I don't believe in them, but if this is true, and these theologians who know Hebrew a whole lot better than I do are saying these things, desert creatures will meet with hyenas, and field demons will bleat at each other, and night demons will also repose and find themselves places of rest. All right? And then you start getting a real kind of understanding of what's going on. Remember, this is Edom has now been, destroyed, and what's left is the jackals and the shaggy ghosts. But if it goes on to be demons and these things, very interesting. Yeah, yes.
Back to the reference to a year for the day in verse 8, for the Lord has a day of vengeance, a year of retribution. Is it a literal year?
No, and this is really important for us to understand. When this language right here is symbolic. You can't put the two together. So no, in that case, a year. That's my personal opinion on books like Revelation, when people talk about a 7-year tribulation or a literal 1,000 years. This is the word apocalyptic language. That's what I was looking for. Apocalyptic, or eschatological language. It's figurative. It's metaphor. Yes. Let me just read here. This is kind of drier stuff, but this is Alexander who's talking about this. Amidst these various and fanciful interpretations, the most consistent with itself in this etymology is still that of the Vulgate. I don't want to go to that. If the clause speaks of wild and howling beasts, and not of any one class exclusively, it is more natural that this should speak of shaggy monsters generally, more so than goats. And he goes on to talk about it. I'm going to bore you if I read it the way they do it, but it also talks about witches and things like that. Oh, here it is. With this may be connected another Roman superstition, that of the vampire, which sucks the blood of children in the cradle. These superstitions were adopted by later Jews and connected with the world before us, as denoted in nocturnal spectrae, preying upon newborn children, against which the German Jews were said to have traditionally precaution. And he goes on to talk about that. So it's very possible that, this whole folklore goes back a long ways. If Isaiah's speaking of it, my guess is that over the course of many years, this kind of stuff was passed on, and folklore continues to this day, which is how that actually happens. okay? Let's get back to the point here so we can get into something better and more edifying. But what do we have here? Edom is destroyed, the sacrifice, we talked about that, and now it becomes a desolate place. I would suggest this is eschatologically pointing to not only judgment but hell. Okay, I'm going to jump to chapter 35. Watch this. This is beautiful. And this is the joy of the redeemed. The desert and the parched land will be glad. The wilderness will rejoice and blossom. Like the crocus, it will burst into bloom. It will rejoice greatly and shout for joy. Don't you get the sense like you just left the nocturnal demons and all of a sudden you're in the desert, and this dry desert all of a sudden what? Gushes with life. The sun comes up, the crocuses rejoice. The glory of Lebanon and Carmel and Sharon, they're all known for their beauty. The glory of Lebanon will be given to it, the splendor of the Lord. They will see the glory of the Lord, the splendor of the Lord. Now this is beautiful. Remember what happens, the haughty and the prideful gets judged. Now watch this. This will be for not you who have it together, all right? This is not about the person who's got it together. The splendor of our God will strengthen the feeble hands, steady the knees that give way. Say to those with fearful hearts, be strong, do not fear, your God will come. Yes, Messiah will come. He will come with vengeance, and listen, with divine retribution. With that same divine retribution, what will he do? He's going to come to save you. I have this sense of it, same with the sacrifice and the wrath, everything, it's the same action in a certain sense, and it all culminates in the person of Jesus Christ. And there's something here that is beyond me. It's beyond me. But when God speaks of his righteousness, I see both things happen. And now here we have, this whole act of God is going to save me. And who am I? I'm the one with feeble hands and knees. I'm not strong. Remember earlier on, Isaiah spoke of the wick that will not bend over, the reed that will not bend over, he's going to take care of. And isn't this what Jesus does? Isn't this the prophecy of he who would come? He will come to be the miracle worker who will what? Cure the lame and the blind. He will come to help because that's who I am. This takes away from all of our pride and everything. Then will the eyes of the blind be opened and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then will the lame, we will leap like deer, and the mute tongue shout for joy. I'm thinking about Matthews. Oh Lord, what? Open thou my mouth, so that my mouth shall declare, my lips will declare your praise. Because I don't even have it in me to give you glory. I don't have it in me. But you're going to give it to me, just like the water returns to the desert. See? From death to life. This is, water will gush forth in the wilderness and streams in the desert. The burning sand will become a pool, the thirsty ground, bubbling springs. In the haunts where jackals once lay, we just heard about those, right? What will happen? Grass and reeds, papyrus will grow. And a highway will be there. Jump to Matthew 7:13. Go to the New Testament. Matthew 7:13.
What did you say?
Matthew 7:13. I'll go ahead and read it. Jesus says, enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. Now you go over here. A highway will be there. Why is it that we have those kinds of verses, and at the same time in the book of Revelation we have, what? A number that you can't even count. All right? And I begin to realize I don't know a whole lot about what's going on here. I would suggest to you that we don't know a lot about what's going on because it sounds almost contradictory. Or is it that in Matthew 13, entering in through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate that is broad? Yeah, I understand the destruction and everything, and many enter through it. Small is the gate and narrow that leads to life. I know I can't even get to it on my own at all, can I? Because I'm a feeble person. But a highway will be there. It will be called the way of holiness. The unclean will not journey on it. It will be for those who walk in that way. Wicked fools will not go about in it. No lion will be there, nor any ferocious beast get on it. They will not be found there, but only the redeemed will walk there, and the ransomed of the Lord will return. They will enter Zion with singing. Everlasting joy will crown their heads. Gladness and joy will overtake them, and sorrow and sighing will flee away. Isn't that beautiful? A few things I said, verse 1. What's really interesting too, in verse 1, the desert and the parched land will be glad. It's very interesting how often Isaiah speaks of the personification of nature. That's big, isn't it, for Isaiah? And the fact that nature, in one sense over here, is desolate and burdened, and now it's beautiful. It's rejoicing with life. I don't know if this answers the question of whether dogs make it to heaven, but I think nature always was part of God's plan, wasn't it? Wasn't it?
Yeah, when you read like in Genesis where nature's groaning because things aren't right, now it's put back the way it's supposed to be.
That's right.
Which is where then the struggle with if it's all destroyed, how is it?
I personally think it's going to be resurrected.
Because otherwise he will cleanse, right? Because if God has to destroy it all, in some sense, his creation is, he loses it.
That's right.
So he has to, so he
Right.
doesn't have to,
Right.
but potentially.
Yeah. You know, my opinion is that the new heaven and new earth is a resurrecting. It's all here. Yeah. I'll remember Professor Marquardt, seminary. I remember. I always believed this, but I always kept it to myself. But when one of the professors would say something like this, I could get some. Because Professor Marquardt said, "Don't look up like you're in heaven." I know that's where Jesus ascended. I understand the physical reaction, but heaven is right here. Heaven's another dimension. He says it's another dimension right here. We could be wrong. I wouldn't, hang my whole hat on that, but that makes sense to me. I think you're right. God creates, and what he does promise us is that our bodies will be what? Resurrected, even though it rots into the ground. It's going to be resurrected.